Welcome, everyone. I am here with you tonight, messing up my mouse. What the heck? To tell you that you should be angry.
Is it on It's on slideshow.
No, I don't think that's it. Anyway,
Mouse wheel.
I think it's the mouse wheel. So I'm here tonight to talk to you about how you should be angry about politics. You should be angry about your engagement or non-engagement in the political system, about your degree of representation, about the kinds of ideas that are being discussed, and the level of discourse in America. Politics in America is kind of gross. There's a massive problem with American politics, and everybody knows it. Everybody can feel the way in which political discussions they're kind of awful. Even if you like engaging in politics, there's a way in which they feel just sort of like, I don't know, Sisyphusian. Is that right? Yeah. Pushing a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll down again every time. It's frustrating. It's like nothing ever really gets said, a giant echo chamber full of empty words. So, my name is Max Harms. I'm here to talk to you tonight about leveling up the political system. Because I don't think we have to be satisfied with this status quo, with America as it exists right now. And I think that we can apply the tools and thoughts of rationality to get better at how we engage in politics. This talk is going to be very content-rich. I have a lot to say tonight, and I'm going to ask that you hold your questions to the end for the most part. Hopefully, I'll get through this fast enough that we can have a nice, rich Q&A. But I am very confident that if we pause to get into the weeds, we'll stay there. So I'm going to try to get all the way through first. Hopefully, there will be a break in the middle, depending on how I'm doing for time. We have notepads and pens. If you're interested in those, Gleb will be passing them around. You can jot down questions that you have. I encourage you to do that. So it's going to have a lot of stuff in it, and some of you are probably very interested in politics and political engagement, and some of you might be less interested in political engagement. You may be frustrated at the degree to which I gloss over something or I go too fast. We can go into more of the details at the end, but even if you're not particularly interested in politics, there will be some good takeaways, I think, for everyone here. Okay, so on we go. How do we fix a broken political system? How do we engage in politics in a better way, to make ourselves heard and to gain a sense of trust and to gain a sense that what we're doing is collectively the best sorts of actions, right? How do we engage in a productive and healthy way and make our votes count? I could talk to you at great length, about specific politicians. I could talk about specific policies. I could talk about paradigms and where we get our political intuitions, about what the correct politics to have are. But tonight, I'm going to be focusing on the meta level. This is a standard rationality technique. Instead of just attending to what the politics are, what the policies are, what the politicians are, we're going to be talking about how we engage with politics itself. What is politics? And approaching this at the meta level will allow us to hopefully gain a sense of how to engage productively and have good decisions and good thinking. Because politics and rationality are deeply linked. Rationality, as I see it, is about how we improve our own thought patterns, how we think better. And thinking better largely involves better decision making and better understanding of the world. Politics is decision making for groups. It's the decision making that happens at the highest levels of our civilization. And it is a highly intellectual activity. It's a perfect place It's a perfect place for us to apply our better reasoning. We would hope it's a intellectual activity. We would hope that it involves a lot of thought. So hopefully we can bring it there. Speaking of meta, let's go into the outline of the talk, just so you have a sense of where we're at. So first there's the introduction, we got past that. Next, we're going to talk about rationality in politics. We're going to go into a little bit more of how we might be able to be better political thinkers and encourage more reason and nuance in political conversations. We're going to talk about what makes politics hard. Why do people suck so much at having good political conversations or making good political decisions? We're going to talk about some basic improvements to how we engage politically. Low-hanging fruit, so to speak. Then we're going to move on and talk about political coordination, how to do that better, especially in our local community. Hopefully I'll get the break in right there. We'll see. And then when we come back, I will be talking about systemic problems in American politics and where we ought to be directing our attention in terms of fixing a broken system. And that will mean talking about instant runoff voting and superior voting systems. And I'm also going to talk about futurarchy. And if you don't know what futurarchy is, most of you probably won't. Don't worry, I'm going to talk about it. And lastly, we're going to talk about putting it into action and the next steps. What can we do moving forward as a community? Okay, so rationality and politics. There's a saying in the rationality community that politics is hard mode. Being a human is not always straightforward. There's lots of complex decisions that you need to make, where you go to eat, what a good diet is, where you want to work, how you want to conduct your relationships. All these things are difficult in a way. But nothing really strikes at the heart of human bias and these sorts of things quite like politics. Maybe some other things, but politics is definitely hard mode of thinking. It's where our biases come out in force, where we start being emotional reasoners and being unwilling to concede points. We'll go into some details in a moment. But for now, let's talk about previous thing that I talked about 2 months ago, I think, a couple months ago, here at Columbus Rationality. I talked about why rationalists don't vote. Because there's a tendency in the community of people who care about better thinking to disengage from politics. There's a sense that politics is for people who are bad reasoners, who are fond of using slogans and fall prey to us and them thinking, right? It's very tempting to hold the high ground and not do that. And I explored some reasons why one might do that and one might not do that. To summarize, I found that there's one fundamentally important reason why it is rational not to vote. And that is, in short, that voting is something of a public good. And in any situation where there's a public good that is being contributed by some group of people, you can be a free rider by just opting out or not engaging in contributing to this public good. So in this situation, our society needs to be steered. We need to make good decisions as a group, but your specific engagement in voting this way or that is minuscule and probably does basically nothing. So we would want intelligent, wise people to engage in making collective decisions for our society, but each one of those individual people is probably selfishly benefited from doing other things. You might want to engage in politics if you're altruistic and you feel like this is a way that you can help society, but from a selfish perspective, it doesn't make any sense. There are also good reasons not to engage in politics, even if you're altruistic, although they're less applicable to rationalists. Politics is an unfortunate convergence between needing to pick out strategies which are good at selecting good outcomes, things we want, and picking what things we want, picking the values and goals which we as a society push towards. If I'm not voting for this law or that law, is it because I'm opposed to how it impacts civil rights, or is it because I don't think that it's going to be effective at accomplishing like a decreased crime rate? These things are difficult to distinguish. And for a person who's not very wise or good at making decisions, engaging in politics can add noise to the system and can make the level of the discourse go down, right? I often think that it would be beneficial if more people stayed out of politics. This is some examples of how our biased thinking and our irrationality creeps into the political discourse. There's a concept in the rationality community of the worst argument in the world. The worst argument in the world goes something like this. This thing which I don't like can be framed in a way that makes it seem like this other thing which is obviously bad. I'm going to pretend like this thing that I don't like is the thing that is obviously bad, and, you know, rah, I hate it, you know. Capital punishment is murder, right? Murder is bad, we don't want to murder. Capital punishment is murder, therefore capital punishment is bad, right? Just equivocate between the two. Taxation is theft. Every day is 9/11 for the unborn. That one is particularly emotionally motivated, right? Emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is particularly prevalent in political discourse, and hyperbole takes hold. Often, in political conversations, it's not a question of what is being said, but rather who is saying it louder, right? Or what saying is catchier. We are in a dialogue of sound bites and bumper stickers more than anything else. And this sort of hyperbole can be effective at swaying people who are not good at taking a step back and reasoning about it. Sometimes it's even effective for those of us who consider ourselves better thinkers than most people, because it is evocative. But rationality can serve as a higher path. We can take a step back from the hyperbole as individuals, and we can work on how we can think better in general. We can understand how to appreciate the perspectives of other people, how to communicate more effectively, how to listen, right? How to be properly calibrated in our beliefs. Instead of absolutely 100% confident that this is the correct path forward, we can be appropriately nuanced and subtle, at least as individuals, right? This is what rationality offers. But what can we do about politics? Because even if we're better at thinking, that doesn't change the fact that most people are still doing the same awful stuff day after day, using sound bites and hyperbole and emotional reasoning and rhetoric which is meant to convince voters as opposed to move the dialogue forward. We could disengage, right? But besides disengage, how can we do politics better? So one option is called deliberative democracy. In a deliberative democracy, it's rather simple at heart. Deliberative democracy just says, instead of just voting, how about you talk about what you're voting about before you vote? So in a deliberative democracy, you make sure that everyone who votes has a good conversation about the topic first. I'll give you a picture of what this looks like, although it can happen at any scale, right? It could happen at the highest scales, but it can happen at the level of local groups like this one making decisions. So let's imagine that instead of election day, where half of Americans, more or less, go to the polls on presidential election years, and we instead select 0.001% of Americans to vote. Gleb, you have a question?
Actually, 2.5% of Americans vote.
It depends. There's On some elections, there's a high turnout.
Half of people are registered and half the registered people vote.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So 0.25.
I did not know that. I update in the face of evidence. Okay, so we select a tiny fraction of the populace, let's say 1,000 people or 10,000 people, and we give them the day off. All right, we make sure that it's a holiday for them, and they go to retreats or libraries or something along those lines where they have a facilitated space, and they're selected to best represent all the American people from all walks of life, regardless of socioeconomic status or whatever, right? So 1% of these people will be in the top 1%, 1% of these people will be in the bottom 1%. All minorities will be represented in accordance with their actual, percentage. And then you have a conversation. You say, what is it that we are here to decide? And you have a nuanced conversation. You have a conversation that takes a few hours. You make sure that everyone's thoughts and perspectives are heard, and you give time to each of them. And then at the end of that conversation, hopefully, the people in that group can find consensus and say, I think that we've decided what the best thing to do is, and you move forward from there. And if you don't, then you vote. Basically, just talk about it before voting. This is a low-hanging fruit to how we can do politics better. Another low-hanging fruit is Kaplan testing. So in 2015, I ran an experiment in the rationality community to do a Kaplan test, better known as an ideological Turing test. In a Kaplan test, what you do is, let's say you take someone who's either a Republican or a Democrat, and you bring this person and you put them into a room full of Democrats, and you tell them, be a Democrat. Then you take that person out of that room after some time has passed and they've had the opportunity to engage on political issues with these other Democrats, or these Democrats, and you put them in a room full of Republicans and you say, be a Republican. Okay? Then you take them out of that room, and at the end you go and you ask the people in those rooms, do you think this person was genuine or an imposter? Because they were one or the other, right? And there's a scale here, but if the people can't tell whether or not they were interacting with someone who is genuinely a Republican or genuinely a Democrat versus an imposter, if it's just as if you would flipped coins to determine what people thought, then you can be confident that the person who you administered the Kaplan test to understands the positions of the people who they're with, at least well enough to fake it, right? This is a low bar, but it's a bar that a lot of people will fail at. And maybe just setting up that bar would be a nice way to improve how we engage with politics. A third way is vote canceling. This one's much easier than the other two and fairly straightforward. So let's say you've got an issue that has one of two options, yes or no, or you have two candidates that could reasonably win some sort of election or something like that. And you feel inclined to vote one way, and you know a friend who's inclined to vote another way. If you both go and spend your time voting, you will have canceled each other out in the great tug-of-war game that is voting. You will have wasted time and motion by both participating. And so, ideally, what you can say is, I recognize that you're going to naturally cancel my voting out, so why don't we just not vote and have an agreement not to waste our energy? And you can do this. If both people agree not to go to the poll and vote in that way, then you will have saved a massive amount of time. Imagine if 500 people want to vote blue and 501 people want to vote red. Okay? You could save the time of 1,000 people, theoretically, and just one person goes to the poll, makes the decision, all right, you've succeeded. Okay? There's a question here about, like, what about third-party candidates, or options which nobody really thinks are going to be selected, but maybe it's worth pushing in that direction anyway. And the simple solution here is that you make an agreement not to vote for primary candidates, and you're still allowed to vote for third-party candidates. This only works if you trust the other person, of course. In America, your votes typically are not public, and so there's ways that you could theoretically cheat around this, but nonetheless, it is an optimization to be made, a superior mode of engagement. But all three of these things have one thing in, or all three of these things have a fundamental thing in common. They have something that is necessary for that. They all require coordination. They all require you to have a group. Even vote canceling requires you to have at least one other person who is not voting in the same direction as you, right? You need a community of people to do a Kaplan test. You need to have a community of people in order to have a discussion about the political decision to be made before you make it. And coordination in politics is super duper duper important. In a certain sense, this is what politics is all about. We get to make a decision as a society. That means coordinating, that means acting as a group. One of the most fundamental ways to act as a political group, or as a political unit, is to form a voting bloc. A voting bloc is just a group of voters that have all agreed to vote according to some sort of principle or consensus of the group, as opposed to on their independent ways. So why is it beneficial to be part of a political group or a voting bloc? One of the fundamental valuable things being part of any sort of political group is signal boosting. If you go out and you start yelling about your politics on a street corner, you will be ignored and people will be irritated by your presence. But if you get 1,000 people to do that, then you might have the start of a movement. You might have something which can attract the attention of the populace. You might have something that can attract the attention of politicians. Okay? Even if these 1,000 people each went out and yelled on street corners on 1,000 different days, there's something different about having the coordination to all do it all at once. By acting as part of a group, you make yourself more visible, and you are able to specialize within that group more. Okay? If you want to make something happen, specialization is important, and having people who are more vocal can allow people who are less vocal to be heard, for example. Voting as part of a group also helps with consistency. And as an example, churches are really good at this. So if you've got a church that typically votes in a specific way, and it does this year after year after year, then a politician can look around a community and say, aha, here is a group that acts in a consistent way. And if I shape my platform to cater to this group, I will be more confident in my ability to secure their votes. Consistency is important in signaling. And, perhaps most importantly, acting as part of a group allows for non-voting activism more easily, right? Things like protests are a good example of this, but you can also talk about things like petitions or just letter writing. There's all sorts of things that are more possible when you have a large group of people who are all active in the same way. But not everybody wants to be politically engaged. This community is built around better thinking, not around political engagement or any specific political platform. And so I would be surprised if most people in the rationality community are like particularly interested in political activism. Some of us are, but some of us aren't. So what's the solution here? If we want to get people who are good at decision making and aware of better thinking involved as a political unit. So the solution is liquid democracy, sometimes called delegative democracy. I'm going to not use delegative democracy because it's a little bit of a mouthful and it's too close to deliberative democracy. So we're going to call it liquid democracy, or even better, we can just call it vote lending. In vote lending, it's fairly straightforward. You say, I'm not an expert in the system. Let's say I want to make sure that we have the best economic policies here in the United States, but I'm not an economist. I don't really know what the best economic policy is. What I can do is I can lend my vote to an economist who I trust to represent my values. I say, aha, you seem to be, caring about the same sort of things I do, and you're much more informed, so I'm going to give you my vote and let you vote for me and just walk away. And that saves me a bunch of time and energy. Vote lending allows for expertise to shine and specialization, right? Those of us who are good at reasoning about, economics can act in an economic way. Other people who are more engaged in civil rights can be experts in civil rights. And we can lend our votes in different ways at different times for different subjects. It's also much more efficient in the sense that people who aren't interested in political engagement can just lend their vote to someone who is and check out and feel like they're still contributing to the process, right? By making their voice heard in this way. We'll talk more about this in the Q&A if you're curious. So, I talked about this earlier. One of the fundamental problems with politics is the confusion between goals and strategies. The confusion between, I don't like this because I don't think it's going to work, versus I don't like this because this doesn't represent what I want. And we'll talk more about goals and strategies later on, but one of the fundamental ways to improve how we engage as a political unit is to make sure that we distinguish these things as rationalists in our minds when we move forward. In vote lending, we want to lend our votes according to the people who we think represent our values more than the people who we think are making the best decisions. Because if you lend your votes according to who you think are making the best decisions, then you're really just you're not letting expertise do its thing. Okay, you're just perpetuating the same sort of republic that we have right now, where we elect politicians not to come to informed decisions, but rather to push specific policies that agree with us. Okay, so in short, political coordination is important because there are opportunities to be wise as part of a crowd, to leverage the wisdom of crowds. If you find a group that is good at making decisions as a unit, as a collective, is good at swarming properly, essentially, then you can trust in the decision-making of this group more than you trust in your individual decision-making. The ideal is essentially to find a group such that when you get outvoted, you say, aha, very interesting, I'm probably wrong. Or, I'm glad that the needs of the majority are being represented in this instance, because that's how the most good gets done. So this is the slide that I'm going to pause at. I think we have plenty of time, so I'm going to say we should take a 5-minute break. If people are comfortable with that, there's restrooms and drinking fountains. I'm going to get a drink of water. You can talk to me during this break, but I encourage you to hold your questions or most interesting discussion so that everyone can participate later on. Okay, welcome back, everybody, or at least most people. We got some people who are like, no, get me out of here right away. Politics, I can't take it. Okay, so we were just talking about how we might engage in politics in a better way, different systems. We talked about coordinating as a group and the benefits that that can bring. So doing politics better means engaging in better politics on a individual level, but there are also systematic problems that we need to address. American politics doesn't just suck because of people's individual minds. There are flaws baked into the system that we need to address. So let's start with proportional representation and winner takes all. This isn't actually from America, this is from Canada, which has a better system, but you can still see the flaw. So here on the left we have a whole bunch of different political parties. Canada is blessed with having more than 2 political parties, and they each get a certain fraction of the vote for the electorate. Those votes then go and elect representatives. And on the right, we can see the percentage of the seats in Parliament that are won by each of those parties. And there are some interesting repercussions of this, namely that the plurality of the NDP, plurality is the largest minority, it's not necessarily a majority, just this minority here got 79% of the seats. They're not the biggest group. The biggest group are non-NDP people, but they're the largest minority, and as a result, in a winner-takes-all system, this is a winner-takes-some system, in a winner-takes-all system, if you have more votes than your competitors, you win. American politics is worse than this, okay? Because in American politics, we've got like one president, right? If that president gets more votes than any other presidential candidate, then they will be elected regardless of whether or not they got the majority of the votes or not. This rarely happens nowadays because there are pretty much only 2 political parties. There are only 2 political parties in America, basically, because of a strategy that comes out of winner-take-all. In this situation, Bloc and Liberal got combined approximately 37-38% of the vote. Okay? But they only won 14% of the seats. If Bloc and Liberal set aside their differences and found some sort of compromise that neither of them really liked, right, but was somehow a weird mishmash of the two that they both preferred to NDP candidates, they could have won significantly more of the pie by compromising. In other words, in a winner-takes-all system, minorities are advantaged and incentivized to group together with other minorities to form some sort of compromise that best represents their average, rather than voting for what they feel like is the best representation of them as a group. And when you do this enough times, eventually you get down to just 2, right? The smaller groups will continue to compromise and form alliances, and you get this sort of race to the bottom, where it's who can compromise the most, the hardest, the fastest, right? Until all you've got left is one enemy, and you can't compromise with that one enemy because what's the point? You've still got a vote to do. And there's some interesting math here that suggests that when you've got iterated elections and political parties that can respond to voters, that the representatives that run for office are going to be very, very close to the average voter in terms of what they represent. If politicians in America feel very samey to you, that's because they're appealing to the central voter. And this is what the average American looks like. Unfortunately, that's just where they are incentivized to go. It's the same sort of math that explains why there are lots of restaurants in a single place, or lots of shoe stores in a single place. People converge to that location. So this explains why lots of parties converge down to 2, okay? But it also explains why we're stuck with 2, in a certain sense. There is at least one person here, besides me, who knows who this is. All right, good. We've got more. But most of you probably don't know who this is. This is Zoltan Istvan. He's running for president in 2016. He is the representative of the Transhumanist Party. You probably didn't know that there was a Transhumanist Party running for president. And, you know, voting for Zoltan Istvan is probably throwing your vote away, right? Nobody's paying attention to this guy. He's doing good work because, you know, he gets interviews and stuff like that and uses the political race as something of a prop to talk about transhumanist issues. And I can appreciate that. But he's got no chance of winning. If he had a chance of winning, it would be worse. Okay? Nothing hurts a group more than having an appealing alternative. If Bernie Sanders decided to run as an independent, it would cripple the Democratic prospects for 2016. Okay? The more votes the Green Party gets or the Libertarian Party gets, the more votes are siphoned off from parties that have a larger chance of winning. And people know this, and this keeps third parties from gaining any success. The system is built to naturally suppress third parties and suppress diversity and suppress representation of what people actually genuinely care about. These aren't the only this isn't the only systemic problem in American politics. One of the other primary problems is districting, and how do we draw lines on maps? Because there's this thing called gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is awful. Here's a great slide on this. So you've got 50 precincts, 60% of them are voting blue, 40% of them are voting red. So in a sort of a natural voting, blue would win. But that's not guaranteed. If you divide this group into districts, into blocks, and you have each of those blocks vote in a certain direction, then how you draw the blocks decides who wins. You can win with a minority, okay? And in case you don't believe me that you can win with a minority, I mean, this happened. In the year 2000, Al Gore got the majority of the votes for president, but lost because they were votes in wrong places. If you are in, let's say, Louisiana, and you're a Democrat, and you're not in one of the specific districts where Democrats win, you probably aren't doing anything by voting for president, or for voting for your congressperson, or whatever. You're just going to be in this minority that is not counted because that's the way the lines are drawn on the map. Okay? Most people live in places that are so polarized one way or another that their votes don't do anything. This gets back to why rationalists don't vote. Ohio is actually one of the few places where your vote may have some impact, okay? But in a lot of, right? This is a small probability, but nonetheless, on certain issues and things like that, Ohio is enough of a swing state that it's contested. For your House of Representatives, that's less the case, because the district lines have been drawn so that Republican areas of Ohio regularly elect Republican representatives, and Democratic bits, like we're in right now, regularly elect Democratic representatives. So it totally depends. Okay, so we've got an electoral college, which determines how presidents are elected based on the drawing of lines. We've got some uneven representation in the Senate that comes from each state getting 2 votes. So places like California get as much say as places like Nebraska in certain senses. And then you've got places like the House of Representatives where districting and gerrymandering largely determine who gets elected when. So what do we do about this? Well, last month, I think, at the Humanist Monthly program, there was a very nice presentation from someone who works at Fair Vote, which is a group which petitions for electoral reform. They're pushing for some very important changes to the American system, And if you don't want to get engaged in the rationality community doing rational politics or anything like that, and you want to take away one thing from this talk, it's you should check out Fair Vote at fairvote.org. They're pushing for several things, but one of the primary things is to cut down on districting and switch America from a winner-takes-all system to an instant runoff election system. So here's how this works. Instead of electing one representative to the House of Representatives for your district, you combine yourself with a much broader area, and you say, for this broader area, the people will elect, say, 3 representatives. So then when you go to the polls, instead of voting for just one person, you can vote for people by ranking them according to your preferences. So here's an example of one such ballot. I say, John Citizen is my #1 preference for my representative, and then Mary Hill is my #2, and Jane Doe is my #3. And the way instant runoff works is, let's say that I vote for someone who does not have any chance of winning. Let's say I go and vote for Zoltan Istvan, right? When we tally the votes, we see that Zoltan's not going to win. So everybody who voted for Zoltan moves on to their second place candidate. And in this way, they can vote according to their preferences without having their votes thrown away if they're voting for someone who is not going to get elected. We move on to the second place candidate, and perhaps that second place candidate does get elected. Any extra votes that go to that candidate get moved on to the next highest. So let's say Mary Hill was already a shoo-in. So why would you vote for Mary Hill? So the extra votes for Mary Hill get discarded, and we move on to the third place, Jane Doe. So in the same way, I'm encouraged to vote for my preference, even if I think that candidate is likely to win. This is a system which encourages proportional representation. Because if you've got, let's say, an area that is 40% Democrat and 60% Republican, and you're electing 3 candidates, what you're going to have is you're going to have 2 Republican candidates, but you will get 1 Democratic candidate. You will at least have a representative that is a Democrat that represents you for your region. And there's reason to suggest that proportional representation in this way, by using broader districts and instant runoff voting, can vastly improve competition. It can allow for third parties to have a chance. It can allow for more fringe positions or minorities to be better represented. One of the things is it will improve probably women representation in politics. If you are submitting if you're a political party and you're submitting a candidate to run in a broader district where multiple people get elected, you're going to submit a team. And there's evidence that suggests that when a party submits a team of candidates to be elected to some sort of office, they go out of their way to be more diverse in their offerings. And when voters select among preferences, there's evidence that voters tend to push towards diversity. So all of this is very well and good. I think this is where our attention should primarily be. Yeah, there's a question?
It also encourages the major parties to cooperate more, because they can't count on the fringe votes from their parties any longer. They can very easily make the other guy their first choice.
That's a very good point. It encourages cooperation, and it also reduces a degree of partisanship, because people within a party can attract more votes by being, stealing from, by being a little bit more blue than the most, than the lowest ranked blue people on the other side, right? There's lots of good reasons. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so this is good. This is sensible and sane, and I encourage us to push for reform in this direction. But this is Columbus Rationality. and we like to go push towards the fringes more and have a sense that, what if we went full hog and tried to optimize everything, right? I'm particularly weird, and I say, let's get weirder. Let's pick out some sort of strategy that is not like anything that we've seen before. Let's get weirder like these weirdos are weird. Because once upon a time, these weirdos, they had the opportunity to design, to have a government, and pretty much all of the governments around them were monarchies, and it was the sensible thing to do, to find a king and start a new kingdom. But they're like, no, let's do something weird. Let's run an experiment. And it's not to say, democracy started in America, but it was definitely an experiment. And I like experiments, so let's run an experiment. The experiment that I would like to run is not to try out a democracy. We've done a lot of democracies, that's great. I'd like to try a government called a futurarchy. So futurarchies are like democracies, in a certain sense. And they can be summarized by 6 words. Vote on values, bet on beliefs. Right? So, in a futurarchy, we distinguish between strategies and goals. Okay? Values are the things that we push towards, things like low crime rate, things like an environment which is not polluted, things like, everyone getting fed. These are things which pretty much everybody is like, yeah, in an ideal world, we'd love to have that happen. Okay? Most of what politics is about, not all of it, most of what politics is about disagreeing over strategies. This is not what I think leads to success. So by distinguishing these two, we can break that conversation down. We can have conversations about what is valuable, and we can have conversations about how do we get what is valuable. So let's talk about voting on values. Let's say I come to you and I say, what are your values? List them for me, okay? Even better, vote for them. And I'll let you split your vote. You can assign whatever percentage to whatever value you want. Let's say you care about animals, so you put 7% of your vote towards animal rights. Let's say you care about the environment, so you put 12% towards environmentalism or something like that. You care about world peace, so you put like 50% towards world peace. Okay. You break your values down into some sort of numerical representation. And then you hand this in. And everyone does this. Not just some small group. You genuinely go to every person and you say, what do you care about? We are the government of the people, and we want to make sure that your voice is heard. Note the important thing about voting on values is that you can't really say you're wrong. You can say, I don't value the same sort of things you value, but you can't really say your strategy sucks, right? If someone cares about animal rights, I might be like, no, humans are the important animal, other animals, whatever. But I can't say they don't value animals. They do. That's why they voted for them. And their voice needs to be heard. So we aggregate all of these votes according to the proportion that people give them. We combine like my 7% with your 14% and someone else's 29%, and then we average them all. And at the end of the day, what we get is a great big pie chart of what people find important in the world. We don't have this. Isn't that strange that we as a civilization don't have a good picture of what people care about, right? We can't go and say, how do the values of people from Columbus differ from the values of people from Portland? There are some polling organizations that have done similar sort of things, but we as a civilization don't have the sense of rigor in just going and asking people, what do you care about? We say voting, voting, voting is super important, but we don't have a sense of saying, why are you voting? What are you voting towards? And from this, hopefully, each of these values, each of these sectors that we are trying to maximize, is linked to one or more concrete metrics, something that we can actually look out into the world and measure, right? Something like carbon dioxide emissions, something like GDP, something like, like we can measure GDP, something like homicide rate, okay? If we can link each of these things to an actual aspect of the world, which is unambiguous, then this turns into a great big utility function. A utility function is something that we can evaluate the world with. We can say, this is a better world than that one. If we have two possible worlds, we think about an action leading to this world or that world, this utility function will allow us as a civilization to say which of those worlds is superior. And now we move into strategy. And we let experts take over. Because we need to figure out the path from this world to the best world that we can figure out. What's the best path? What's the path that leads to the most flourishing according to the utility function that we've defined? And that's a very complicated problem. It's a problem that no single person is going to be able to solve. We need some sort of way to aggregate the information that each of us has as to what the best path forward is. So let's say I think, let's say I think that not banning guns is the way towards a lower crime rate, and you think that banning guns is the way towards a lower crime rate. So one of the things we can do is we can apply some of our rationality skills. We can get together, we can talk about the issue, we can try to be concrete and reason about it. But maybe at the end of the day, we just don't know, and we have a different opinion on this, and it's just, there's no traction. So what do? So a standard rationality technique in this domain for resolving disagreements is to bet on them. Turn your belief into a number. Instead of saying, I think that banning guns will lead to a lower crime, what probability do you offer for that? And how does that probability translate into a bet? Because if you have a lot of people who are interested in betting according to their beliefs, then you can start combining these and aggregating these into a betting market. If you've got enough people who are thinking about the future of the world and making bets in this way, these are self-interested bets, by the way, that will actually pay off. So expertise is rewarded, okay? If you don't know what you're talking about, you'll have your money taken from you. And you're rewarded for knowing what's true. If you have enough of these people working together, you'll get what's called an idea futures market, or a prediction market. These exist already. We can go and place bets. I mean, it's kind of illegal if you're in America, but some places can place bets onto, for example, who the next president of the United States is going to be, or whether or not Britain will leave the European Union.
Factual point, it's not legal in the United States. There are some legal ways of placing bets in the United States as part of academic discussions.
Yes.
So, factual.
We can get into the details in the question and answer. Thank you for the fact-checking. And we can actually look at how prediction markets do. And prediction markets do really well. Prediction markets regularly outperform individual experts, time and time again. You can go to specific idea futures markets and you can say, you know what? This has successfully predicted who is going to be elected president year after year after year. By looking at the price of some future, you can get an estimate as to what the community of experts thinks the probability of an event is. If the price for Hillary Clinton becoming elected is approximately the same as if the bet is about 1-to-1, then you can be confident that the probability is about 50%, according to the best experts that we have. So price becomes a probability that we can use to track the world. And there's a very cool thing that happens if we start betting on conditional probabilities. So let's say instead of just voting on who is going to be elected president, we vote on what the GDP will be if one person is elected president, a specific person. So let's say a condition on Donald Trump winning the presidency. What am I going to bet that the GDP goes up or down? If Donald Trump is not elected, then this bet is refunded to both parties. Okay? This forms a conditional probability. And if you have enough people voting on conditional probabilities, what you get out is a giant Bayes net. A Bayes net is a kind of modeling structure in mathematics that we can use to think about what's true in the world. The experts combine their beliefs and make bets. These beliefs become probabilities. And if we condition these probabilities on other events, then we get a sense of what will cause what. If we condition based on a policy, if we adopt this policy, are we going to be at war in 10 years or not? Then the price of that bet becomes a signal that we can look at. And in futurarchy, it's actually fairly simple. All we have to do is when we're making the decision, we apply the utility function that comes out of sampling people's values to each of the outcomes, and we multiply that by the conditional probability of each of those outcomes. And then we pick the action that leads to the best world, or the best expected utility. That's futurarchy. So let's summarize. I'm sure lots of you have questions and thoughts. Rationality and systems of superior thinking give us a leg up in discussing politics. We can become more aware of our own biases and better able to engage in nuanced and deliberate ways instead of falling prey to emotional thinking or just being, shouting at each other a whole bunch. But in order to engage in an effective and productive way, instead of just wasting our time, we need to be coordinated. Forming a voting bloc is something that I am interested in doing. There was discussion of forming a rationality voting bloc, I remember 5 years ago or something, way back in the day. And frankly, I think it's about time this happened. The rationality community is, I think, wise enough to have this as a project or a facet of the community. And if you're worried about it taking a bunch of time and effort, don't. Okay? Because if we do a voting bloc successfully, then you can engage according to your level of interest and expertise. If you're not that interested, then just say, all right, I recognize that there are interested, intelligent, wise people in my community that probably represent my values. You get to decide who I vote for, and then I'm just going to vote as part of being part of the community. And the people who are interested and passionate can then have productive discussions, hopefully, and move the community forward. We can do things like push for electorate reform. Even if we're not going to change the world all by ourselves, there's value in becoming organized, in raising awareness for these sorts of things, and making it happen. Because even though politics is hard mode, it's really super duper important. Politics is where we make the decisions that our society goes through, right? The biggest decisions usually happen in, or often happen in politics. And so disengaging means letting go of the steering wheel in a certain sense. And I think that we need more steering, not less. And by engaging in rational politics in a coordinated way, we have the opportunity to experiment and to try out better modes of political organization. This is, I think, very important because one of the questions you might have is, what good does a few people getting together to do some sort of weird political voting bloc do? What good is a small group? If an individual is better served staying home, what makes a few people, a small community, any better? But I think the point is to be scalable at all levels. The ability to scale up and to serve as an example. Engagement in politics can be a monument of the rationality community which is visible and appealing to others. People can go and say, what is special about the rationality community? And we're not just some other group to hang out with. We do certain things. And one of the things that they can point to is they can say, aha, they're actually doing politics in a sensible way. That's pretty cool. Either I want to be part of this group, if I'm interested in sensibility, or maybe we should just steal this. And the seed of a good idea or an experiment can scale up to a larger level. And that, theoretically, can scale up even further. This is what I want to do. I want to plant the seed of better engagement and have us pave the way so that next year, or the year after that, or the year after that, we build upon this and it becomes a standard practice in our community to engage in politics in a sane and sensible way. So I want your help in doing this. My goal this year is to have a local rationality voting block. It's to get people in this community engaged in voting. It's probably not going to be a ton of people, but that's the point, right? Is we have a community here. And if we can get organized this year and understand, lay the groundwork of it, it can grow with each sweep of the spiral. If you're not interested in politics, please lend me your votes, right? Lend someone else who's interested in politics your votes, right? Be part of the voting block by saying, I trust you to make sensible and informed decisions about voting. When I was voting last November, I had this weird sense of panic as I realized I had no idea who was on the ballot or what issues were important. And the issues that I did think were important, I was confused about, and I really wanted to know what my community thought about them. So I went and asked a bunch of people in my community, and they were mostly confused too. It would be great if we as a community could get together and actually, at least have a sense of this is probably the direction that we want to go. And if you're interested in politics, that's great. I want your help in making sure that we do politics right, in implementing a scalable solution, something that can be spread to other rationality communities across America and across the planet. Because this local rationality group is just one of many, 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 okay? And the movement is growing. The number of people on Less Wrong is increasing. The number of rationality adjacent communities is increasing as people become aware of what science and reasoning has to offer.
Are there dozens or hundreds or thousands?
Thousands of what?
Of people or groups?
Thousands of people.
Thousands of people?
Yeah. We get about 1,000 people, I guess, on average, entering the rationality community every year.
Entering.
Yeah. It's a global movement. So, I talked about politics being important. Okay? Politics is important because this is where big decisions are being made. And there's there's a sense of hopelessness in politics, often. If you're hesitant to engage with this, it's probably because you're bitter about having, watched political discourse remain at this low level or get worse and more polarized over time. But rationality is about the sensation that more is possible. It's about realizing that, wait, I was given this crappy brain that's really bad at thinking about things, but I don't have to just stay at this level of bad thinking and be satisfied with the status quo. More is possible. We can push ourselves to be better thinkers and reasoners, more capable in our own minds. And I think that more is possible in society, in civilization. once upon a time there weren't democracies everywhere. And then there were. Someone had to go and make that work. And raising awareness of how to engage in politics better can help make a better world.